It is my distinct honor to welcome my next guest to the program, American legend Ron Paul. Dr. Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to be with you.
You're looking very well, Doctor. And, I've been following your broadcasts on YouTube at the Ron Paul Liberty Report, and I believe you are as concerned with the COVID-19 pandemic as I am, and viewers of Crowdsource the Truth are as well.
Yeah, I've been concerned about it and trying to sort things out. And there's a lot of misinformation out there for sure.
And that's what I want to talk to you about, because you've been a champion of liberty, freedom of speech, personal liberty for as long as your career has gone on. You've made tremendous personal sacrifices to this country as a military veteran, as a doctor, and a member of Congress. We're seeing now that even as the 74-year-old president was infected with this virus, he's out of the hospital after a couple days, seems totally fine.
Yeah, he is. And there's a lot of people that do that and they didn't even have a day or two of fever or anything. My son Rand had it, early on in this so-called epidemic. And he ended up getting a test mainly because there was some political pressure put on him because of, well, you've been exposed, this sort of thing. And he had a positive test, but he was asymptomatic the whole time. So there are probably millions of people out there like that, and that's probably very good. There's a lot of people out there probably immune for it.
Right. But here on social media, when we talk about it and even discuss the things you and I are saying right now, we're in danger of being eliminated from YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. Crowdsource the Truth's Facebook account was totally deleted. Tens of thousands of users as of last week can't even see us there anymore. How does this align with your vision of liberty in the United States?
Well, it's a mixed bag. Matter of fact, we dealt with this issue on the Liberty Report today because it's not so simple as saying they have no right to do this. Where the confusion comes is who owns the media, that part that's delivering this message. In a free society, in a libertarian society, the individual who owned the newspaper or the magazine or the website would be charged of it, and they could pick and choose, and people doing bad things or things you don't like or you just disagree with, you would be in charge of it, and you could strike them from it. It wouldn't make maybe good sense, and maybe it would look like they're violating the principles of liberty. But we don't have that today, and that is the problem. It's a struggle for libertarians to figure out the right position, because right now, if I argued that case, and some libertarians do, they say, look, it's private, it's Facebook, and they're a private company, and therefore they can do what they want. But it's not really private in the sense that a real private newspaper used to be a long time ago. The media that is being used, the social media, is something that was really structured by the government. It's permitted by the government. They spent some money on it. They are an arm of the government. They deliver a lot of information to the government, and they're obligated to. They're exempt from litigation, and that is not quite free markets. So I would think that it's a can of worms in some way, because the answer shouldn't be that we're going to send better censors in there. We could have better censors in there, and they'll compete with the censors that Facebook put up. What you need to do is explain why the only way this can be resolved is look toward a libertarian answer, which is private ownership, where you have the right to regulate and dismiss people who don't follow the rules. What if you have a private station, you have a religious program, and somebody demands, well, you're just talking about your religion. What about my religion? It becomes so the ownership of the property is so valuable. So some people think you can't say anything, but it depends on where you are. If you're in your house or your building, you should have, total control. Our problem is the world has become too mixed up. It's like schools. You should have freedom of speech in schools. The schools are a mixed bag. They're run by the government and set up by the government, and therefore you can't have that. So they mix up causes people to think that they have a right to march in and control things. No, the problem is that government shouldn't be involved in running our schools. We have generally a pretty good understanding about the separation of church and state. They can't, they're not supposed to at least, but indirectly they do some of this to regulate it. But that is understood. But today, what we need to do to help solve the problem, if you wanted to deal with education, which is one of the important issues where the members of Congress and everybody else learn their lesson, is they have to they have to be separate from the government. So we should have separation of education in the state. Right now, we're dealing with interference by the government on coronavirus and medical practice. We should have separation of medicine and the state. But that's not on the horizon. So now we're going to fight over who are the bosses and who should do what. And one group, if they have more power and more influence and they control Facebook and Twitter, they have an advantage. That's where the problem is. But turning it into a free society and answering these questions, no easy task. All we can do is talk about how it should be done, could be done, and we wouldn't be fighting over these issues and would have true freedom of expression.
You raised so many important points, Dr. Paul. The protection, I believe, that you're talking about, the indemnity from liability, has to do with the Communications Decency Act, Section 230, which protects things like Twitter and Facebook as operators of networks, but they've entered into this really bizarre realm where they're not just operating networks, they're curating the content in the way that a newspaper would. What Twitter and Facebook are doing is essentially similar to a private company like the phone company perhaps contacting me after this interview and saying, hey, we don't like what you just said to Dr. Paul on the phone. You're not allowed to have a phone anymore. So it is a complicated and tangled area, but I also want to talk about what you're talking about with the merger of government in our healthcare. And there's been such a push for this. You've seen this evolve throughout your career from both the medical side and the political side. And it frankly touches on the social media and publishing aspect as well. It seems that there were a few doctors early on in this pandemic through social media and even in the New York Times who were pivotal in convincing the public that this was an apocalyptic pandemic. Millions might die. Here in New York, Governor Andrew Cuomo has just published a book about leadership where in this state, more people have died than in China. The New York Times published this video, Dr. Paul, that shows a patient in bed wearing sneakers. Have you ever seen such a thing in your medical career?
No, but I was talking this morning on our program about what they're doing in France and saying that a woman getting ready to deliver, she's in the delivery room in labor, she has to wear a mask. I mean, how insane can it get? But no, when I graduated from medical school, which was 1960, we didn't have Medicare or Medicaid, and there was a fair amount, almost, the large majority of medicine was delivered by private sources and a lot less government regulation. But that has changed because Medicare and Medicaid came in the 60s. But those early years, and people always say, well, it was so necessary. You guys in the private market wouldn't provide services. But, when I got out of medical school, I was very ambitious. I wanted more experience, and I wanted to make a couple dollars. So I went to work. I was still in the military at the time, and I would go and moonlight at the hospital in San Antonio. And I worked, I made an astounding salary. I made $100 a night. I made $3 an hour. I'd work for 10 hours. So, but nobody was turned away. So I said, it wasn't like everybody was out on the street begging to be seen. But we've moved it in, and, I keep thinking that now we've heard in the last couple of days all about are you going to get rid of the Affordable Care Act? Well, they should call that as the Non-Affordable Care Act, because we can't afford it, and yet they go on because and the other thing that people don't realize, if you object to that or agree with me, what you have to endorse, are the use of guns. We generally know that if you're wealthier than your neighbor still under today's circumstances, they don't have the right to say, well, you have 3 cars, I don't have any, and I got to go to work. I have a right to this, so I want one of your cars, and I come in and take your car. Well, no, you still can go to jail for that. But the government has a gun. But they don't
Right.
send one individual to do it. They send their congressmen who come in and say, hey, you know what I do? If you just do this, I'm going to get you free medical care if you vote for me. So, but if you don't do it, if you don't go along with it and capitulate, they use a gun to collect the money or put you in prison for not obeying the law. And that's where the problem is. This whole idea about guns. I'm really for gun control. For all the bureaucrats and politicians in government, if we took the guns from them, maybe we wouldn't have so many foreign wars going on, and we wouldn't have to have so much authoritarianism that doesn't exist if the government doesn't threaten you guns and imprisonment for not obeying their rules. And that's sort of what's coming with the coronavirus, because we hear people. This is astounding that if you don't go along with these mandates by executive orders, I mean, they're not even laws. They're not even suggestions. The people are capitulating. They're rolling over and they're doing it. The worst thing that's coming out of here is that people get so convinced that it's so dangerous that I have to report my neighbors. If they're out mowing the lawn and they don't have their mask on, I got to tell them. And that is where the real danger is. People just have lost the understanding about what liberty is all about, and that so many of the things, whether it's coronaviruses or anything else, general medical care, the problems come not as a failure of freedom, it's a failure of government intervention. And there's quite a bit of difference, because if you agree with one, you want more government guns. If you agree with the other side, you want less government, and you want to legalize freedom of movement once again and open up our social and our economic system once more.
Yes, it really is troubling what's been happening with these draconian gubernatorial overreaches, both by Abbott there in your state of Texas, and perhaps the most egregious is here in New York with Andrew Cuomo. But you've raised so many important points, Dr. Paul. You mentioned that, many people associate the Obamacare Affordable Health Act with free healthcare, the government somehow giving you healthcare, which in fact is not what it is. It was actually a big push, if I understand correctly, and I'm sure you know much better than I do. I understand that it was a big push to just force everybody to buy health insurance, which people should have the right to choose if they want health insurance or to just save their money and throw caution to the wind. I think there's another important problem, Doctor. People don't understand the concept of insurance. It's a mathematically derived business where, if we look at car insurance, if every person looking to buy car insurance went in there and said, hey, my car is already wrecked, but I want to pay the first month's premium, $450 or whatever, and have you fix my car for $8,000, just mathematically speaking, every single auto insurance company would fail. I feel it's important that we have a regulated insurance industry for the people who participate in capitalism in our society. And as a sympathetic society, we could perhaps provide health assurance for those that can't afford to pay for it or perhaps need constant health care. What do you think about that idea?
Well, I'd be careful about who's doing the regulations, because it isn't lack of regulation, it's who's doing the regulations. Free market and capitalism and libertarianism are very, very strict. If you have an economic downturn, there would be bailouts and there'd be loans made and all, but it would be done involuntary. It would be done by the marketplace rather than the government coming along and saying, you get this and you get that. But you bring up the subject of insurance. That is a big bugaboo for me, because I live on the coast and we have hurricanes quite frequently. But you can't, even now, people say, well, I'm not going to get insurance. It's so expensive. I'm going to wait until I see where it's coming. Oh, it's near Florida. Oh, well, I'm going to wait until it gets in the Gulf. Oh, you say it's 250 miles off the coast. I'm going to go get my windstorm insurance. People, would laugh at you and say, you can't do that. That is not insurance. And the same way with prior condition, you can't have medical care, promised to you. And that is all a consequence of previous regulations. because medical care has been delivered not so much in the marketplace, but through the combination of big unions and big businesses. They promise it, and your medical insurance gets passed around if you change jobs, and therefore you don't really deal with the insurance company. How about if that? I imagine they're still available, but they're used to be available that you can get life insurance for your kids. When they're 12 or 15 years old, you go out, you buy a life insurance, and they're very low risk. But the condition is you stick with us, and you're going to have insurance for life, and you can do this, and they can measure this. But this whole idea of artificially regulating it, so the market has to regulate it, and I like the argument that the markets, libertarians, you don't want to have any regulation, and it's going to be just chaotic, and nobody's going to get anything that they need. No, it's going to be much better because right now, I never voted for FEMA, and I live in a flood-prone district, along the coast, and we had the hurricanes come in, and people say he does, and the business people especially, he doesn't even vote for flood insurance and FEMA, and I would. People would complain, but they kept voting for me. But then eventually, the FEMA people, on a couple of hurricanes, they came in. They were so inept, and I can recall people calling. Then they'd call my office and they say, "Oh, we need help because FEMA's not doing what they're supposed to." Well, my position on that, if they were forced to pay for it and they're supposed to be insured, I would go to bat for them, represent them, and say, why don't we do this? But after a while, I had a lot of comments and letters written. Ron Paul was right. This FEMA stuff, all it does is get in the way. It interfered with the voluntary people and the Red Cross and all these things. So this whole idea, this humanitarian argument, is really, really the toughest thing to overcome, because if you don't go along with it, the same thing going on with coronavirus. If you don't go along with regulations, you're a killer. You murdered the people. They say the president's murdering people because he hasn't endorsed all the nonsense.
Absolutely. I mean, you raised so many points, Dr. Paul. I think you're one of these guys who a lot of people look back in the rearview mirror and say, wait a minute, he was right. Unfortunately, in many cases, it can be too late. You also raised the point of Medicare and Medicaid and how those things came about during your career. I think a lot of people, or at least certainly myself, don't necessarily understand the distinction between those two things, but there's been a lot of talk here in New York. Back in January, the New York Times reported on Governor Cuomo's massive restructuring of the state's Medicaid program. The article's headline asks, how to fix a $6.1 billion budget hole, and it suggests that attacking healthcare spending is a way that the governor might do that. Now we've had all this reporting about people dying in hospitals that are run by the New York Health and Hospitals system, which I understand many of them are Medicaid recipients. How can you help our viewers understand what Medicaid is? And I don't know if you're aware of Andrew Cuomo's program, but this seems strange to me.
Well, Medicaid I see as just a welfare program, and Medicare is something we theoretically pay for the government insurance, and they're supposed to take care of it. But the goal is the initial reaction to Obamacare has been a bonus to the insurance company, and you mentioned that earlier. Yes, the insurance companies didn't fight it, organized didn't fight it, the drug companies didn't fight it, but and the people went along with it because if they had to go buy drugs, which if it was the market, it might be $100, but if you go along with the system, you only have to pay $5 for this, something like that. So people get sucked into this. But even if they keep doing what they're doing, it will go broke, and that's what's the problem. And even if they get one person payer, which is what their real goal is, with it's totally socialized. We have corporatism now. We have a combination of the corporations and government working. So this is something that they will have to do, because what will happen if they get to one party payment, they say we're going broke, and that's what we'll say in New York. We're going broke. What are we going to do? Price controls. Price controls always come under these conditions. What happens then? Then there are shortages. Then there are shortages. Then you have a black market. Even in medicine, there will be a black market. There was, the elite in the Soviet system always had pretty good medical care
Right.
because there was a black market there, and if you knew the politicians, you got away with it. But it's a routine, it's a ritual that's been going on for a long time. They regulate, they create new money, they inflate the currency, prices go up, they put on wage and price controls, and then there are shortages, and then finally sometimes they get rid of them. And we've had that cycle very often during our war periods, Second World War, Korea War, and then they have in the 60s we had them again, and then they have to finally take them off. That's what hopefully can happen with all this regulation and the destruction of our freedom of movement with the rules on coronavirus, is that the people finally get disgusted with it. And we're seeing signs of that right now. And even though there are places getting opened up, there are others that are saying, oh, no, it's too dangerous. But they got to believe in the principle, and they have to understand that a freedom principle is the only way they can be safe and secure and taken care of in the best manner possible, not with bureaucracy and not with this idea that government officials who have learned all that they know about economics and social policy from government-run schools. They've all been, intimidated by that. And that's why, the Republicans and Democrats, as much as they fight, they endorse the same ideas when it comes to government involvement in medicine, government printing money, fighting wars overseas, the welfare state, deficits don't matter. We don't hear any of that talk in this presidential race. It's all about who gets to spend the money. And that argument is going to get bolder and bolder because there's less and less money and more poverty. The cycles have to come and the bubbles burst. And that's why they have not admitted to it. What they have done is they've taken this coronavirus, and I was on a panel the other night, and the talk was about, the economy and all they wanted to talk about was the coronavirus caused everything. But that's not true. It's caused a lot of trouble. But the real problem is the malinvestment from excessive spending, and then the Federal Reserve printing the money and taking interest rates to zero and thinking, well, all we need to do is keep printing money. And so far, they're getting away with it, but it's not going to last. And that's why I anticipate that things are going to get very, very rough, especially if the election isn't resolved in November and it just goes on and nobody knows who won.
Absolutely. And you just raising so many points, Dr. Paul, that are so important. You spoke about corporatocracy, and people seem to think that the CDC and the Federal Reserve are government agencies. And as I speak to people on both sides of this type of argument, I think a lot of people who maybe watch CNN or MSNBC, they think that the term deep state is a joke and made up by Fox News or something like that. But what they're really talking about is this embedded supranational core of bureaucrats who remain in government irrespective of what country we're talking about and irrespective of who is elected or who is in power. People like Anthony Fauci, who have been in their position for decades, and somebody like Tedros Adhanom, who sit atop of these powerful agencies that are in many ways dictating how each of us can live our lives right now, I consider part of the deep state. And I think a lot of people don't realize, Dr. Paul, that healthcare.gov, the website that everybody signs up for Obamacare with and has all our records, this was created by, it was contracted to a British company called Serco, which has separately been involved in a massive scandal for defrauding the British government over prisoner tracking. So this is kind of like the corporatocracy that you're talking about. What danger do you see with this type of control from foreign corporations over our healthcare?
Well, it's going to get a lot worse because we're going to go bankrupt. So they're going to fight a lot more, and it's a power struggle. But they didn't start it. They are a consequence of what has happened over the last 100 years because it's a philosophic problem that we have. And it is the acceptance of government intervention. It's an acceptance of Keynesian economics. It's the acceptance of the philosophy that says deficits don't matter. And everybody's been brainwashed in a philosophic way. and the people in Washington were all Keynesian. But they argued and they fought and over who gets control of, the person who controls the spending. But the deep state are just those people who stay one step above and beyond the average voter, and their job is I don't see the deep state as having monthly meetings. They're just unofficially cooperative, and they know what's going on, and it's a natural consequence. You look at Gottlieb right now. Look how he was at the FTC. He and he's the one that goes back and forth with the drug company. He works for the drug company, but that is a consequence of a philosophy of crony capitalism, of
Right.
government intervention. It's the intervention it's not socialism, but there's a louder and louder cry right now because people say, what you guys are doing, you people who believe in freedom, it's not working. So that's why we need total Marxism. And that's why Marxism is getting so much attention right now.
And that's a real danger. I think people are starting to wake up to the Marxist roots behind Black Lives Matter and Antifa. I know you have very limited time with us today, Dr. Paul. What do you see happening in the next few weeks with the election and either possible outcome?
Well, it's going to be, I don't think it's going to go smoothly, especially if there's no reasonably definite winner. There's going to be a lot of argument, a lot of fighting, and I think more violence. So I see it as very, very dangerous, but it's going to probably be more than it was in the year 2000 when nobody knew whether Bush had won or not. I think it's going to be much, much worse, but who knows? Maybe there'll be a surprise and there'll be a lot more people gravitating to one side. But it's such a terrible choice to go through, but it was a terrible choice, in 19 or last election, and yet we survived that. What we can't survive is just doing the same thing over and over again, not changing the philosophy, accepting the idea that the printing of money, the Federal Reserve System, deficits that we run up, fighting wars overseas, we're just so antagonistic with everybody. I reported today, the incident in Iran. The Iranians have a little bit of money, and they ordered to get some vaccines, flu vaccine, old-fashioned flu vaccines, and then our boycott on them prevented them from getting it. And they a lot of vaccines coming, and they said, well, no, we have a rule that says that there should be no prohibitions against the medications to even a place like Iran. But it turns out that we control the finances of it, and we put the controls on it. And it's so unnecessary. And we're just looking for more problems. So that's why one of these days, along with this chaos that we have here at home and in medical care, we're going to have some military confrontations that I'm afraid it'll be very easy because Republicans and Democrats alike have already built up their ultimate hostility toward China and Iran, and they're itching for a fight. That is really dangerous. I will need to move on so we can finish up.
Absolutely. One final question, Dr. Paul. I don't know if you've had a chance to see or hear the fallout from my interview a few months ago with Alan Dershowitz, where he basically stated his opinion that the government has the right to grab you and jam a needle into your arm to forcibly inoculate you if they determine it's for the greater good. It was a pretty scary vision from an individual that people can form their own opinions about. What do you think about Alan Dershowitz's comments regarding mandatory vaccination?
Obviously, they're very threatening. They're very threatening constitutionally. They're very threatened just for the standing of liberty. But fortunately, I think that is over the top, and that we keep preaching that. Today, I made the issue once again. Think twice, before you sign up. Don't rush and get one of these things, because a vaccine that's rushed through can be a lot more dangerous than the disease. But in some ways, it's such a tragedy that people would listen to that nonsense and not have more concern about their personal liberties. But they've been intimidated, they've been terrified, and they're unfortunately are very much intimidated by all the nonsense on the air. All we can do, people like you and others that feel this way, we just do our best to change people's opinion. I don't happen to think that I think the politics of it all is secondary. I don't think if I went back to Congress and had 25 people go with me, I don't think that would change things. It would help, but it's not going to be the solution. You have to change the philosophy of a people. They have to get more people who understand, have a love for liberty, and the approach is 100% opposite of what the Democrats and Republicans have been doing to us.
Absolutely. Dr. Paul, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to join me. I know that most Crowdsource the Truth viewers are very familiar with you, but for those who have not yet subscribed to the Ron Paul Liberty Report, you can go over to YouTube and sign up to watch. Dr. Paul is doing excellent reports over there, and I can't thank you enough for joining us today. Have an excellent day, Dr. Paul. We'll see you soon, I hope, and thanks everybody for watching.
Thank you.